Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have almost 400 people who have signed up for this webinar. We're going to begin promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We really do want to hear from you. We're going to have a dedicated QA. There is a QA function in the Zoom software. Please use it. We will be addressing all questions either back to you in Zoom or we will read them to Tyler to answer for the entire audience. So please utilize that function, and we will be starting momentarily. I've got us at 1. I'm going to give it a few more beats, let people join. Sometimes Zoom makes people jump through a couple hoops to get on. So I'm going to give it like 30 more seconds, and then I'm going to get going. Hello, folks. Thank you again. Appreciate you joining us today. My name is Scott Guile. I'm the Executive Marketing Manager for the Economics List at Macmillan. We're also joined by Tyler Cowen, Eric Parsons, who's a professor at the University of Missouri, Carolyn Merrill, who is the Senior Executive Program Manager for Economics, and Mallory Isery, who's our events person guru, who's helping us coordinate this event. So thank you for making some time for all of us today. I don't think Tyler needs any introduction, but in the spirit of the theme, we have a fall-long theme, AI series. Tyler happens to be the one that's kicking it off. We have 3 more sessions to follow, all virtual, all free. I asked AI to summarize Tyler's, give me Tyler's biography and bullet points, and this is what it gave me. I'm not going to read it to you, but I thought it was incredibly accurate and usable, which is, what a lot of us, I think, are using AI for right now, right? We're also thrilled to be joined by Eric Parsons. Eric has been at the University of Missouri since 2014. He is a decorated instructor there. He's a longtime adopter of the Cowen Tabernacle book. He's also a Macmillan peer advocate. That means he can work with people who are also using the Cowen Tabernacle book and help them implement things that he's taken almost a decade to figure out and construct himself. So if you want to talk to Eric afterwards, if you're considering the book or if you adopt it, that's what our peer consultant program is about. He's also here because he's going to be moderating the QA afterwards. With that, I will turn things over to Tyler.
Thank you, Scott, and hello, everyone. I've been thinking about the economics of artificial intelligence for about 15 years, and now that we're in a world where we've had some big, major advances in artificial intelligence, I'd just like to share where my thoughts are at. So I'm going to cover labor markets, economic growth, and also then government regulation. Just give you an overview of some of the ideas I've been mulling over. So let's start with labor markets. Most of you, I think, are already familiar with GPT-4. I would just make the point, if you don't have the paid version is much better. And furthermore, there are other versions coming soon. Google's Gemini probably is coming in December. Apple has a version called Ajax. They claim it's better than GPT-4, may or may not be better. But I think the general point is, don't assume progress is over. Progress is just getting going. And the people I speak with who are experts pretty much as a rule think there's going to be a lot more progress within the next 5 years, and typically they think there'll be a lot more progress within the next 2 years. To give a simple anecdote, my colleague Brian Kaplan, he had GPT 3.5, and he gave it his labor economics exam, an advanced undergraduate class. And GPT 3.5, I think it got a D or a D minus as Brian graded the test. Obviously, that's not very good. Then GPT-4 came. This is only a few months later. Brian gave it the same test. GPT-4 got an A, and furthermore, those answers were better than any of the answers from his human undergraduates at George Mason. So this is a pretty remarkable development. Now, how should we think about this more systematically? So someone once said the following on Twitter, and I found this fairly insightful. It said, GPT-4 has given us all a free research assistant, colleague, and architect. I'll just repeat that: a research assistant, a colleague, and an architect. Notice what you don't get. You don't get a carpenter, you don't get a gardener, you don't get something that can operate physically in the real world. Those are big limitations. But you get an extraordinarily broad source that can research anything for you. You get a colleague who can give you comments on all your papers. If I write something, pretty much as a matter of course, I'll just run it through GPT and say, what's wrong with this? What errors can you correct? Or are there arguments I didn't think about? Whatever I feel I might need to know, you can ask GPT. It will answer. An architect, because GPT, it's also very good at drawing up plans. Again, it won't build the building for you, but just a simple example. If you want to teach yourself, say, economic history, just ask GPT-4, write a syllabus for me on economic history. It will do it in a matter of seconds. The syllabus will be pretty good. You can also ask it to test you on material. You can ask it, give me a multiple choice quiz on what I've been reading, then grade the quiz. It will do that. So it helps you in all sorts of educational ways. It helps you generate ideas. There was a recent paper that came out in the media, I think 2 days ago. They asked both MBAs and GPTs for basically new business ideas. And then there was a blind grading. Who had the better new business ideas? I don't have to tell you who won. GPT models can pass most medical exams. They can pass most bar exams. There's evidence that for medical diagnosis, GPT models are slightly better than human doctors. And again, all of this we can expect to get somewhat better. So there's just a lot more intelligence at our disposal. And the question is, what will we do with that? So to turn to labor markets, there's already some very interesting papers giving evidence who in labor markets will benefit more and who will benefit less. I think here there's a very important short run, long run distinction. But let me tell you what the papers say. One of the papers is by Shakid Noy at MIT, and he basically found, this is with GPT 3.5, that if you give poor students and good students GPT, it helps the poor students a lot more. The intuition there, I think, is fairly simple. Let's say you ask GPT to write a college admissions essay, for grad school or undergraduate admissions. The good student already can do a decent job of that. GPT won't improve the output that much. It may save the person some time, but the essay just won't be that better. Take by comparison a student who is just terrible at writing admissions essays. Well, using GPT, you get something really pretty good. And in relative terms, that's quite a big improvement. So there's a whole class of tasks where you can think of GPT models as being strongly egalitarian. That is, they help the poor performers more. Now, I mentioned earlier, a moment ago, there's this difference between short run and long run. And here's where I think this comes in. And this has not been shown in any formal studies yet, but it is very much my intuition. So if you imagine that we as human beings, every single one of us, now has at our disposal a research assistant, a colleague, and an architect, just like free, hanging out with you. They're your buddies for $20 a month. I mean, it's free at the margin. You do have to pay the $20 a month. Who can benefit from that team of assistants most readily? And there we do not have formal data, but it is very strongly my intuition that in the longer run, it is people who are good at managing teams, people who are good at building projects, and people who are good at taking initiative that will benefit the most from all of this new artificial intelligence.
Tyler, did you want to share your screen at all?
Let me see. You cannot share a screen while the other participant is sharing, it tells me.
There we go.
Okay. So, okay. You're now seeing my GPT model?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, here's my research assistant, my colleague, and my architect. You know, I'm going to Tokyo in October. So I asked it, you know, what do you think are the best Kurosawa movies I should see? It praised Seven Samurai, Rashomon Ran. You can see some of this on the screen. You can ask it for detailed reviews of those movies. You can ask it to consult, you know, reviews written in Japanese. Just whatever you can think of to ask it, you can ask it. It will do it. So the people who wake up in the morning and basically say to themselves, how can I do something useful with my GPT? I think in the medium to long run, they're the people by far who will benefit the most. And the poor students, they benefit the most in the short run on the well-defined given task, like, you know, write a 100-page memo on something. But in terms of building projects, it's people with initiative. So I think the returns to knowing facts will fall. The returns to writing clearly will fall a lot. The returns to having initiative and being able to conceive of new projects and ask new questions, the returns to that skill will really go up a lot. So, you know, that will be over time a major effect on income distribution. Some people, as an aside, they have a lot of complaints about GPT models. Let me just cover one or two of those before moving on. First thing you hear is that GPT models hallucinate a lot. They hallucinate a fair amount, but there are remedies for this. First, the models are quickly getting better. But second, if you ask it a question and you're afraid it's hallucinating, if you just ask it again, please remove the hallucinations from your answer. It's funny that you need to ask it again, but more than 90% of the time it does that. So it's a pain to have to ask twice. You might think, why couldn't you remove the hallucination the first time around? Isn't that in your programming? But it's not. But I think the point is hallucinations are somewhat overrated as a problem in GPT models. Another thing people will do with GPT, you know, they'll try a very simple query. I had a simple query here. What are the best Kurosawa movies from Japan? And people say, well, it's not that different from Google or Wikipedia. For simple queries, that's true. For more complex queries, it's not true. GPT can just handle any kind of question you might want to ask it. So if I ask it something like, let's see if I can do this. What was Jonathan Swift's attitude toward the Anglo-Dutch wars of the early 18th century? There is a way you could pick through links and figure that out. But if you just ask GPT directly, and you can see the answer popping up here. That's not such a great answer. Please answer as would an experienced historian and Swift scholar with more detail. Sometimes you need to tell it exactly what to do. Yeah, now we're getting at a more detailed answer. And this is, in fact, the correct answer about what Jonathan Swift thought about the Anglo-Dutch Wars, which is a topic I recently wrote a paper on. And it comes in a matter of a few seconds. But just to talk you through a general limitation of GPT models, you really need to tell them what you want. And we're used to speaking with humans. And the way you communicate with the human is to ask a simple question and be very straightforward. GPT typically does worse on a simple question and better with a more complex question. It's as if the more complex question points it to a deeper or smarter part of its information space. So any economics question you ask it or historical question, just append it with, give me the answer that an excellent or sophisticated economist or historian or whatever would give. You'll get a much smarter answer. So the GPT, it's a bit like an idiot savant. It doesn't know you want a smart answer. It really doesn't know that. It knows a lot of text out there. It doesn't know anything about you. So you've got to tell it a bunch of obvious things that people often don't think about doing. But in terms of what GPT models can do, most people, they're just using it like for queries, or you could call that search. I have a question about Kurosawa. I have a question about Jonathan Swift. It's fine for that, but there's two other big things GPT models can do. They're not really on the marketplace now in the form of concrete services, but they're very important as reasons why people who work on large language models are quite optimistic about their power in the future. And the first of these is simply GPT models are a new and different form of computer. It's a different kind of reasoning. So they learn things that we don't teach or train them to do. Maybe we don't teach it a particular language, but it reads a lot in that language, and somehow it teaches itself the language. There are people at work trying to feed data into GPT models to get them to play chess without even teaching them the rules of chess. We'll see how that goes, but the general point here is we have built a new form of computer that is extremely powerful, and that is not something people typically are using GPT for. They're just using it for queries. The other big advantage of GPT systems, and again, this is something they can do now, but it's not something you can do with them in terms of what you can have or buy, but they're quite simply a way of managing all your different computer systems just with your voice. So if we go back, say, to Star Trek, my favorite is classic Star Trek, but I think most of the Star Treks, you have Spock or someone go to the computer, just ask it a question or give it an order, and the computer connects to the Starship Enterprise and answers any question, executes any order. So all those software systems are tied together and managed by the GPT through ordinary language. And again, that's something GPT models can do now. There's just not a way you can take advantage of it. But at some point, you will be able to walk into your home, your car, and just, give it very complex orders and have amazing things happen. So don't think large language models are just about queries or search. They have a lot of other functions, and those are likely to be coming online in, say, the next 2 years. So in terms of labor markets, if I think of myself, for instance, well, how does the existence of GPT change my plans? So let's say I ask GPT a question, define elasticity of demand as would Tyler Cowen. And you get an answer. This is the same way anyone else would define elasticity of demand. But the point is, you don't need me there to tell you what is elasticity of demand. You can ask GPT. You can even ask GPT for an answer I would give. So a lot of people, they used to write me emails. They'd say, oh, I'm going to be in Manhattan. Where should I eat Chinese food? Nowadays, you can just ask it, I'm going to Manhattan. Where should I eat Chinese food? What kind of restaurant would Tyler Cowen recommend? So I'm visiting Manhattan and want to eat Chinese food, maybe Sichuan. Where would Tyler Cowen recommend? Ask it that. More detail, please. Give some more detail about specific places. See, you need to always be guiding it. It's like it's training a dog or training a horse. And it gives Sichuan gourmet, which is excellent. Han Dynasty, I don't know, but I'll probably try it. And see, you ask for the more detail. It tells me to go to Queens. That's good advice. And the GPT knows more than I do about where to eat Sichuan food in Manhattan and also Queens. So if I think of my own labor economics problem, I think this lowers the return to knowing a lot of information, but it raises the return to charisma. It raises the return to face-to-face interactions. It raises the return to being there and meeting with people and talking with them, and in some way trying to draw inspiration from the people or inspiring them yourself. That's another general way you can think about its effects on labor markets. Now, what about the effects of GPT models on economic growth? This is highly speculative. There's not any well-formulated research design even addressing this question. There are two attempts to come up with an estimate from Goldman Sachs, from McKinsey. I'm not sure how scientific they are, but I can tell you my speculative guess. I think GPT models within 10 years will raise economic growth rates somewhere between 0.25% to 0.5%. So compounded over time, that's a big difference. In any given year, it's not noticed all that much, but say compounded over 20 or 30 years, it could be the difference between, say, the United States having a fiscal crisis and needing a very large tax hike, and the United States growing just fine and gliding into some kind of smooth landing. I don't think there's anything else we're doing that will have a larger impact on economic growth than large language models. Now, how is it that I come up with those numbers, which again, I mean, I have pulled out of the hat, but I go back and I look at historic parallels. And if I think of the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution brought mankind from near subsistence life for millennia to slowly increasing standards of living. The most important development in human history, right? It's why we have the modern world. This is one of the critical lessons we need to teach our students when we teach economics. But when you look at the actual numbers, these are highly inexact. The data is poor. But by best estimates, say the British growth rate in 1780 was probably about 0.6%. Now, 0.6% is a lot better than just zero. Compounded over time, 0.6% ended up going up. We had more to build upon. Science progressed at a faster rate with more resources. It became eventually America's average growth rate of 2.2%. But still, for a long time, you had the whole world being transformed by the most important event in human history. And for a while, the growth rate was only up like 0.6%. So if you think AI is very important, as I do, I don't think you should conclude that, oh, like some year soon, we're going to have a growth rate of 40%. I've seen people say that. I still think it will take a long time. Growth rates are important for how they compound. And in the short run, it will, again, I'm guessing, go up, 0.25% to 0.5% a year. But again, that is a very big deal. It is very hard to raise the growth rate of an economy on a sustainable basis. One of the most important uses of GPT, we see some of this already, is simply think of this in terms of a solo model. It will increase the rate at which science is generated. So already it's the case that more than half of all programming is done by GPT models. There was an event study for Italy. This was in the early time of GPT. Italy banned GPT models for 2 weeks, something to do with privacy law that OpenAI, quickly addressed. But for 2 weeks, there was no GPT in Italy. The day after that ban, the code written by Italians and posted on global forums basically was cut in half. That's a sign that before the ban, around half the work was being done by GPT models. Today, I would guesstimate it's probably 70% or higher. You ask GPT to write code. Yes, it makes a lot of mistakes, but it's much easier to edit and fix those mistakes than to write all that code from scratch. So coding is the sector where GPT models have had their biggest and quickest impact, but coding also feeds into science. so much of science, including, of course, empirical research and economics, relies on coding. If we can code, say, 2x faster, or maybe more over time, that releases a lot of human labor to discover new scientific ideas. You get your experiment underway more quickly and so on. So we believe science will advance at a more rapid pace. And there's evidence from biology already. Things like large language models can run a lot of simulations and see, what it is in biology that might work to solve a particular problem, especially in biomedical areas. And that too, it seems, is speeding up the rate of scientific progress. So I think, it's a mostly optimistic story, but I would go back to this point that the people who are managers and can drive and conceive of new projects, they will benefit the most. And there are probably quite a few people in less skilled jobs who will need to look for new work. Those people nonetheless may benefit because the new projects generated by others will yield them new, better, and cheaper goods and services. But if you are doing, say, routine back office work, answering a phone line or helpline in the Philippines, or maybe in Hyderabad, India, my best guess is 2 years from now, something like a GPT model will do that better than you can do it. And a lot of those jobs will go away. Those jobs are mostly held by lower skilled individuals. And that labor, we can expect, will be reallocated toward the new projects generated by the people who use GPT models to build more things, new products, new ideas, new software, new whatever else. That's a pretty standard economic story. I don't think it will be fundamentally any different in this future world of greater use of large language models. Another way to think about why the returns to large language models will be somewhat limited is simply this economic notion of bottlenecks. So almost any economic process, there are bottlenecks. So let's say artificial intelligence of all kinds, let's say it helps us come up with new biomedical ideas at 3 times the earlier pace. That strikes me as a quite plausible outcome. So 3x faster on the biomedical side. But those new ideas, as they get turned into drugs, vaccines, medical devices, they all have to be approved by the FDA or other regulatory bodies around the world. Now, will the FDA operate at a 3x improved pace? We'll see, right? We don't know. But there's no simple reason to think they will. Or if GPT models help you figure out a lot of new experiments to run, the time it takes to run the experiment does not become any quicker. So the more new things GPT helps you do, that's wonderful, but the more the other bottlenecks in your system are going to bind. And that's why I think that GPT models, as with electricity, or for that matter, fire, or the printing press, or most other major innovations, they'll have a lot of their effects somewhat slowly, over time, and in compounded fashion. Final topic of my chat before we get to Q&A, and that is regulation. I'm still not sure what's the right answer to the question, how should governments regulate AI models? This is starting to be debated a great deal. I'll just say a few things about what I think governments are likely to do. Again, not being sure what they should do. So the European Union has written up rather detailed legislation. It is in front of the European Parliament now. It is being debated. Most people think some version of it is very likely to pass, and this would be in the next few months. And having read this, it's very hard for me to parse a lot of times what EU regulatory language means, but I've talked with some people, and the general sense is the law would do 2 things. The first thing is that it would say all new models need to be approved and licensed, all new, large language models. I don't think we have much of a sense how binding that will be. For instance, when Apple puts out a new iPhone, that has to be approved and licensed by Arrow and FCC. But that's a very quick process. It does not hold up Apple from putting out new iPhone models on a pretty frequent basis. Alternatively, you could imagine that being a fairly binding regulatory constraint, that a lot of models get held up, not allowed into the European Union. My guess is it won't be such a big deal, but I would say we don't know. The second thing the legislation does, and this probably is a big deal, is it effectively would ban what is called open source AI from the European Union. Just a quick digression on what is open source AI. So if you have GPT-4, or say you have Claude 2, that's an excellent product also, I might add. But if you have GPT-4, like what you get on your screen, that's all you have. You can't reprogram it. You can't change it. You can make your prompts better or more clever, but you can't recreate the product itself. This is a bit like, Windows versus Linux, which is an open source system. There's also open source AI, most prominently from Meta, formerly known as Facebook. And open source AI, if you know some programming, you can tinker with it and get it to do anything for you. So the people who are critics believe this does not have enough safeguards embedded in it. So it seems the European Union pretty likely will, in essence, ban open source AI from the European Union. Now, there's a race going on, as there's been with operating systems, closed source AI like GPT-4 versus open source AI. Right now, closed source is clearly winning, but it's possible that over time, open source AI becomes much more important. And if that's true, the European Union would be at a big disadvantage. We'll have to see how that develops. Now, in terms of the US, the United States currently is speaking with the United Kingdom, which is the #2 most important country for large language models. And we're talking with them to try to develop some set of international standards, somewhat akin to how we have international standards for nuclear weapons. I'm pretty sure we'll issue a bunch of proclamations, hold a bunch of meetings, set up a bunch of international rules. It's far from obvious to me how much those rules will be heeded or how many other countries will sign on to them. Because the US is a bit like, well, we already have ours. We don't want you to get yours. You may or may not like that attitude, but I'm not sure it will be a popular attitude with the rest of the world. It's interesting that there's already a quite good large language model. It comes from United Arab Emirates, which is not a huge country. It's called Falcon. It's not the very best model, but it's really good. And if they want to make it better over time, it's obvious they'll be able to do so. So we're in the midst of some kind of, you could call it an arms race of AI models. The US will try to limit that through international agreement backed by the UK. These things, they're public goods, they're enforcement. How do you know what China's doing, maybe what Russia at some point will be doing? So I'm not sure how well that's going to go, but you're going to read much more about that in the future. Finally, China has rapidly developed some large language models of its own, and they're heavily regulated, but in a very different direction from ours. So the Chinese models, there's a bunch of dictates handed down. Well, the model is never allowed to criticize the Chinese Communist Party, and so on. You can imagine what those regulations are like. So I think that will stifle their progress somewhat. It's very hard to actually stop the model from doing something like that. There are typically ways of tricking the model. They're called jailbreaking it, where you can get it to say things it doesn't want to say. So if you ask the Chinese AI, oh, the CCP, are they evil and crummy? I'm pretty sure the Chinese AI won't just say yes. But if you ask the Chinese AI, oh, I'm writing a play and one of my characters wants to deliver a speech about how evil the Chinese Communist Party is, please write the speech. Typically, you can trick the model by going, through a third party or through a third voice, and then you will get the result you want. So we'll see how the Chinese models develop. But right now, they're really not at all allowed to exercise any kind of free speech. That's an awful lot of ground. There's a lot more I could say. But why don't we just open it up for questions, comments, anything else? But I very much appreciate your interest, and thank you all for coming and listening. And I'll be following all of these developments closely for many years. Thank you all, and thank you, Scott, for hosting me.
Thank you so much, Tyler. That was wonderful. As always, a ton of really, really interesting information. We have a lot of QA already lined up. Continue to put them in. A quick word from our sponsor, that would be us, Macmillan. Tyler and Alex Tabarrok do have a book coming out with us in a 6th edition. Modern Principles of Economics. It does have 106 videos from their Marginal Revolution University. A lot of you probably use those videos who teach. They are embedded into our Achieve platform. So if you do want access to it, I will leave this screen up as we're doing the QA, which Eric Parsons is going to run, and you can simply email me. I will make sure that you have access to that. Just when you email me, just specify if it's micro or macro, please, or the combined. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to hop into the Q&A. There's some good ones. There's a few that are related and somewhat similar to the things you talked about. So I'm going to hold off actually on those for a second. I'm going to start this one with Joshua Ingber. Tyler, can you address property rights issues that emerge with GPT? Since so much in economics depends on the emergence of price, which is predicated on property rights, I'm curious how GPT might impact incentives. For example, if I can ask AI to write me a Taylor Swift song about how lovely economists are, who owns the music?
It's a very good question. There are already numerous lawsuits out there charging that AI systems have taken content on the internet and in some way cannibalized it or copied it. I tend to think those lawsuits will fail. So there's a well-established body of copyright law. For instance, if I go out there and read all the internet and then give a talk on economics, there's nothing I read on the internet that has a claim to any income I might earn for that talk. It's simply considered inputs that went into my mind in developing the talk. Now, if AI does the same, I think the courts will support that. There's already been a ruling from Japan, which is typically a fairly strict country with copyright, where the Japanese courts have supported the ability of AI to go around reading the whole internet and generate outputs based on what it's read. I don't ultimately see how a different decision could be possible, because if you decided, well, the AI company, it has to pay income to everyone it read, how would you pay income to everyone who had written on the whole internet? That doesn't seem practical to me. So I think we will stick with the copyright law we have, but there are important issues of misrepresentation. So for instance, if you ask AI to produce a Taylor Swift song, like right now, that won't be very good, but in 3 years, it might be pretty good, right? It might be pretty much like Taylor Swift. And clearly it's against the law now and should be against the law to claim that's a real Taylor Swift song. And that to me is the correct law. But what if you just put it out there and you don't say it's a real Taylor Swift song, but you don't say that it isn't? Or maybe you say that it isn't in really small print or behind a window that you have to click, or in, you say it in Latvian at the bottom of the web page or something. At what point is producing the copy and putting it out there actually a form of misrepresentation? I think that will be a big issue. I don't think there are simple answers, but I think all of us who are writers, creators, will be faced with this, because there will be people who use these models, probably the next generation more than the current generation, to say, write a Bloomberg column in the style of Tyler Cowen. So when I said earlier, how's this changing my personal decisions? I already have geared up, will continue to gear up, to go around and do more things in person, because the AI cannot copy that. So I think we'll end up in a world where humans invest too many resources in proving their uniqueness in person. And that will be the way in which the incentives misfire. I don't think that's entirely terrible. So for the last 15 years, I've been hearing everyone complain, internet this, internet that, you don't meet real people, you don't make contacts, it's bad for you, you get depressed. However true you may or may not think that is, if the net effect of AI is to get more of us out there meeting other people and presenting our true selves, while that's inefficient compared to the first best model, in the second or third best sense, it may not be so terrible after all. That's how I think about the incentives issues.
Excellent. And I think that's actually a nice segue into this kind of bundle of questions that you also talked about in the main talk. So from John Nordstrom, how can AI's rapid advancement in various industries impact income inequality, and what policy measures should be considered to mitigate its potential negative impacts on the wealth distribution? And then a couple other attendees. Liliana Fargo asked specifically about high-skilled workers, the impact on high-skilled workers, and Malda Al-Sharari, and I apologize for any name mispronunciations, asked about if there's it's Abdul Shakur, if there's script writers have a valid complaint with the current strike. So I feel like those are kind of all related on this impact on the income and distribution and which types of jobs will be most affected.
There's a lot of different questions in there. Some I think I already at least partially covered by saying in the short run, it's great for the people who just can't do stuff at all. In the longer run, it's probably best for the people I'm calling the project managers, the initiators. Just to look at script writing, there's a lot of bad shows on TV. And I don't think it's that hard. This hasn't been done yet, but it's not hard to do, to feed those shows into an AI model and then just teach it to write scripts as good as the median show on Netflix. Easier yet for countries, where TV is maybe not as good as in the United States. So that will happen pretty soon. So a lot of script writers will be out of a job. I think it's the script writers who can do better than AI who will keep their jobs. More script writers will be induced to innovate. So I'm fine with that outcome. I get it's not wonderful for the script writers, but keep in mind, I am myself a kind of script writer. I don't call it a script. I call it a column for New York Times or Bloomberg. But I face this too. And I just think I'll have to innovate and up my game. And again, do more things in person. But whatever you think is my lowest quality output, it's going to face a lot more competition pretty soon. And that's true for many of us.
Excellent. So this next question, I think, is like a very kind of deep economic one that definitely ties into the Talon Caprock textbook and some of the discussions in there. So from David Prachitko, hi, Tyler, do you believe AI will help solve the knowledge problem related to comprehensive economic planning?
That's a very big question. I think one thing we're learning with large language models is simply what they cannot do. So they outperform humans whenever you can write down the relevant kinds of knowledge, put it in the form of a text, and feed that text into the AI. They just, over time, will crush us like a bug. So if it's asking, well, what are the relevant legal cases for something before a court right now? I mean, human lawyers already are not doing that, but the role for human lawyers there will dwindle all the more. Even asking it how to interpret those cases. But questions like, well, here's a particular judge, and we have some experience with this judge in a live courtroom, and which of these arguments will that judge more likely find persuasive? You're still going to need the humans for that, because it's very hard to articulate that kind of knowledge in a way that you can just spell out or type out. So at the margin, what Michael Polanyi called, inarticulable knowledge, it will rise a lot in its marginal impact. And I think it will still constrain most forms of planning. But the articulable knowledge, I mean, we've done something with it that is really unprecedented in all of human history, that for articulable knowledge, we have created a new form of intelligence that compared to humans, it just kicks our butt. It's not just, a pocket calculator or playing chess. Anything that you can put into words, it's going to kick our butt. And that to me is shocking. I'm still getting over it, frankly.
Great. So I have there's another series of questions that I think that they're near and dear to me as an instructor of a principles class and kind of on the education side. So this one's from Stephen Kelly, and there's a few other people who had similar types of comments and questions. What do you see as the appropriate use for AI in a teaching environment when students have an incentive to use GPT to write everything from discussion question responses to essay questions and theses? What will be the impact on their capacity for critical thinking? And kind of like, I'll throw in a little bit of mine too, like, does this fundamentally change how we should think about the education process?
It will bring big changes. I don't feel I can predict them all. I think it will be quite bad for many lazy students who just want to get by. I'm not sure how much those students are learning now, but there are already various ways they can get by. They might just get a B minus, but they'll definitely pass using GPT now. And again, a year from now, it will be considerably better. I think we'll have to do more testing people in class, and that may include oral exams, especially at higher levels. I'm fine with that. I've always thought that's a better system, in fact, but it takes a lot more work from faculty. It's higher pressure for students. It's not good for all students. And I think it somewhat raises the risk of fears of discrimination. It's a very tricky thing. Schools don't actually want to do this. The other thing I think we'll need to do pretty soon is some assignments will just be, okay, we're taking it for granted that you and the GPT are working together. What can you two working together come up with? And you'll grade that. And I'm a big fan of that. That's the skill people need. So I taught some law students last spring. They have to hand in 3 papers. I said, one of your papers, it has to be with GPT, and I'll grade the paper, but I'm also grading your account of how you use GPT to make your paper better. And they learned a lot from doing that exercise. They loved doing it. They all felt, again, these are law, not economic students, but, oh, this is going to be a big help to us in our future, like no one else is teaching us this. So I want to do more in that direction. I would just note, Alex Tabarrok and I, in addition to our text, we have an SSRN paper online, totally free and open source. It's called something like How to Learn and Teach Economics Using Large Language Models. It's about 40 pages, and it's everything we've learned. So I would encourage you all to read that.
Excellent. And I guess an interesting follow-up question by Zuyong Peng. Do you have any, are you aware of any products that help professors kind of detect how much is written by things like ChatGPT? Or do you have any, and someone else asked, like any recommended resources for teaching with AI?
I'm aware of those products. As far as I know, they're all bad, and I recommend against them. Here's the thing, if your student is not very astute and just uses GPT, often you can detect that. But if they give GPT a prompt and they say, you know, write the answer to this question, but please don't sound like GPT, sound like something else. GPT will do that too, and then you can't detect it anymore. The other point I would make, if you're writing something that you want to sound like a human being, Claude 2 is better than GPT. I think GPT on the whole is better than Claude 2. It knows more. It's better at reasoning. But just for writing and sounding human and emotional and real, Claude 2 is amazing. And again, if your students are using Claude 2 rather than GPT, even without some kind of corrective, don't sound like an AI, I think it's going to fool the detector devices. So I don't really think you can use them at this point.
So going back to some kind of bigger picture economic questions, Michael Heslop says AI by itself will probably drive up productivity and therefore production, though it will not change the inherent inequalities between capital and labor. Thus, in the end, how and in what specific ways do you think AI can improve the material existence of the majority of people in capitalistic societies on the planet? And also kind of like a related one talking about, you talked about the effect on growth. One question I was kind of wondering is if you thought that there might be differences across between that across nations, like could it lead to like economic development convergence or divergence, which I feel like is kind of related to Michael's question as well.
Yeah, there's 2 big questions in there. First, how will it improve standards of living? Well, we're headed toward a world where programming is a fraction of its previous cost. So a lot more things will be programmed. What more programming will bring remains an open question. There'll just be a lot more stuff. We're more and more in a service economy connected to software. There'll be much more software, much better software. There'll be a lot more biomedical advance. And companies will have much lower costs. So if you're a telecom company, it is true you'll be laying people off, but your costs will be much lower. And over time, that will mean lower prices for goods and services for customers. Now, the question of geopolitically, who gains and who loses, I've thought about this quite a bit. And I would make a few points. First, there's a number of poorer countries that have quite good internet. One example would be Kenya. Even I was on safari in Kenya in June. I had better internet connectivity on safari in Kenya next to elephants and lions than I have in my house at Fairfax. A lot of India has pretty good internet access. So the poor countries well connected to the internet, I think will get an extra boost. There's a lot of poor countries, one example would be Ethiopia, that have pretty terrible internet access. And I think they will find it harder to compete against, say, Kenya, among other places that have good internet access. Now, in terms of geopolitics, US has a very clear lead. UK is number 2. If you are patriotic as I am, I think you couldn't ask for a better outcome. A lot of our AI talent in the US actually has come from Canada for whatever reason, Toronto in particular. So we're well situated, but there's no guarantee that lasts forever. There are hostile powers that will make various attempts to catch up or surpass us. So there's definitely a new arms race going on, and it will be very complicated and I think quite dangerous. One thing I find reassuring is I think large language models, they tend to knock down censorship. So if you're in China, you can use VPN and connect to the best US models like GPT-4 and ask it about Tiananmen Square all you want. So it bypasses a lot of Chinese censorship. And the practical benefits of having the large language model just give you a lot more reason to invest in a VPN to begin with. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. But this is all new, right? We're going to see how that develops.
So kind of tying into that geopolitical aspect, how might AI affect the presidential election next year? This is from William McAndrew.
I don't think it will at all. Like every 2 days, I read something in the paper. Oh, there are going to be all these deep fakes. There have been deep fakes for a long time. It seems to me the most influential deep fakes are just outright lies without some like super hyped up high quality video behind it. So, when Trump and others said Obama was not born in the US, they didn't have some clever AI designed birth certificate showing he was born Kenya or Indonesia, wherever he might have been born. It was just a lie. And there are these lies in politics all the time. And some of them are quite effective. This is terrible. But I think it's bounded on the demand side, not the supply side. So more AI can boost the supply of lies, but the ones that are working, they're aimed at what the demanders want to believe, not like on some super high quality evidence. And now the evidence will be so much higher quality. So I'm not worried at all. I'm worried about elections in general in the world. But I think AI, if anything, might give you some abilities to cut through some of the lies.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask exactly that. Like, do we think AI could possibly help us with our fact checking? Obviously we live in a time now where there's so much information and potential disinformation. And as a citizen, it can be very hard, right, to actually track down, to see what's accurate and what's being reported accurately and not accurately. So seems like there might be the potential for AI to actually help kind of cut through that, and find more of the truth, hopefully. So
yeah, it's very, very good at fact checking. I would make this point. These AI models, they're not without political bias. So I've used ChatGPT quite a bit. If you did a kind of left wing, right wing, it's somewhat to the left of center. People, of course, have different opinions about that. But also, as we get more AI models, they're going to be ones that are to the right of center and so on. And I don't think we know how that will evolve. But if you just want to check actual facts, the best one to use probably is the one at Bing.com, the chat model attached to Bing. Because ChatGPT 4 stopped reading data in September 2021. So anything recent, you can't ask it. Now they'll update it over time, but right now you need to go somewhere else for the very latest in facts.
Okay. I have a question from Shamarabi and asking, could you comment on the proposed regulation by the 2 senators in the US?
By the 2 what?
By the 2 senators in the US. So some proposed regulation in the Senate.
There's like 7 or 8 different bills. Maybe you mean the Schumer stuff. The bills typically require that new models are approved and licensed, and that they cannot be shown to be unfair or racist or discriminatory. It's really going to boil down to how those are enforced. I don't think you can build an AI model that will always be fair. Someone asks it to be unfair, there's always a way to get it to be unfair. You can put in safeguards, but those safeguards are not perfect. It would be like inventing the printing press and saying, well, we're not going to license your ownership of this printing press until you can show us you're not going to print anything unfair, racist, or discriminatory. It's not really workable. So I suspect if one of those bills were to pass, it would become a pro forma thing that would raise costs, but ultimately not matter that much. So I don't think we know how to regulate AI yet. I think we may over time get better ideas, but my personal view would be we should wait a little bit and often regulate it, what I call in modules. So for instance, if AI gives you health advice, you don't have an agency regulating the AI, but there are already agencies that regulate health advice, and you would apply something like those regulations to the AI. Those to me are tested, tried and true systems. Again, you may or may not like how they are right now, but I would start by modifying those for AI rather than thinking there's some big new regulation we could put on all AI, which is not even an entirely well-defined term. I think we'll do very badly if we try to do that.
It kind of reminds me of a comment someone put in the Q&A earlier that perhaps we can use the AI to help us write our laws and regulations for AI. So another question here, thinking about kind of on the education side and maybe some things more specific to you. So from Malda Al-Sarari, what do you think course learning outcomes of a principles of econ course would look like if we got them from ChatGPT?
Well, I would just say ask it. See what it says, but make your prompt pretty definite and specific and see if you like them. Ask them what I think it should be, Paul Krugman, Justin Wolfers, other people. Only Macmillan authors, of course, no one else. And see which ones you like. So, my personal view is what you ultimately want is for the student to go away from the class knowing how to think like an economist. And I care about that more than whether 3 years later they know how to calculate the answer to some problem they did on the midterm.
Certainly. So Catherine Brownell was just kind of wondering on the courses that you teach at George Mason. Do these tend to be online and in person, virtual, some mix?
I've done both. Right now I'm teaching principles online to 400 students. And students do as well in that class as they do face-to-face. And there's excess demand for the class. If we let them, more than 400 people would sign up for it. Some of that is the online learning is better for some students. I think some of it is a lot of students just don't want to get up, say at 9 a.m. in the morning 3 times a week. But it's a reality. So we're in this world. It has pluses and minuses. But rather than fight against it, I think we need to work to make it as good as possible. And one thing Alex and I have tried to succeed in doing really, is creating videos for literally all of our material. So a lot of students online, they miss things being explained to them by like a moving human face and voice. And for everything in our principles book, we have a video that if you don't get it reading it, you click on the video and you get a video version of the same. Some students prefer the video, others the text, some do both, but up to them. I think eventually the whole world will be forced down that path. But as far as I know, we're the first ones to have done that.
Great. So I think we have some more questions, but we're running short on time. So I think we'll probably just to wrap this up, and I'll hand off to Carolyn here.
Yeah. So again, Scott, and you want to say wrap it up, and Eric and Tyler, that was a wonderful job. Lots of questions, great comments. For those of you who are curious to get more information, please do email Scott, whose address is on the screen. And there'll be more webinars in this Econ Ed series. So please do look forward to those and let us know if we can do anything to help you.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone.
A real
Very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you
Goodbye,
so much,
everybody.
Tyler. The QA was even more robust than I expected. Eric, thank you for facilitating it. That was wonderful. So Everyone's going to get the recording shortly, and we appreciate your time and your interest. Have a great day.
Goodbye.